In the West, social structure is like a framework, an organizational mode of association. This makes Westerners particularly concerned with qualifications and rights. Are you in the right position? Do you have citizenship? Do you have voting rights? Once you have these, your rights are secured. It doesn't matter if you're someone's cousin or how good your relationships are. What matters is your position in the framework. In China, it's different. If a deputy manager in a company isn't well liked, they might not be as effective as a lower ranking driver who has good relationships with everyone. The driver knows everyone and has good connections. Chinese people value relationships and connections. Of course, we're talking about a more traditional rural China, but these phenomena still exist in many parts of modern China. Reading Fei Xiaotong's book can give you more insight into the underlying thoughts and behaviors in Chinese society. Western society relies on a shared framework, so where does their morality come from? Western morality often comes from a single God, with the premise that everyone is equal before God. Everyone is a child of God and thus equal, making everyone brothers and sisters in the eyes of God. This equality and fairness are central to Western moral thinking. Chinese people can't accept the idea that everyone is equal and brothers under God. For them, the distinction between father and son, for example, is clear. However, in Western Christian morality, everyone is a child of God, and thus everyone is equal and brothers. God is fair to everyone, and everyone is equal in his eyes. But who manages society on behalf of God? Since God can't directly govern, there must be a proxy. This proxy is called a minister. In Western societies, the prime minister is essentially the chief proxy, representing God's authority. To govern effectively, this minister must uphold God's morals, ensuring fairness and equal rights for everyone. If they fail to maintain fairness and respect for rights, they risk being overthrown. This is how the Western framework-based society operates. China, on the other hand, is a network of personal connections. Rights aren't given by a deity, they're formed through relationships within the differential mode of association. This vast network of personal connections defines Chinese society. So in China they say, everything begins with self-cultivation, from the emperor to the common people. What is self-cultivation? It means that a young man, when at home, should be filial, and when out in the world should be respectful to his elders. We may not know how to treat strangers in society, but we know how to treat our family, ourselves, and our parents and siblings. This gradually extends to friends. Confucius envisioned Ren, benevolence, as the highest moral ideal. However, if you read the Analects, you'll notice that Ren is never well defined. It's quite frustrating because Confucius often says that Ren is easy. You want it, and it comes. But he also says it's difficult, and he's met very few people who embody Ren. So, Ren remains a vague concept. Fei Xiaotong explains this difficulty. In the loosely structured rural society of China, it's hard to point to a broad general moral concept. Ren is just the logical sum of all moral elements in personal relationships. Due to the lack of concrete social groups that synthesize these personal relationships, the idea of Ren paired with the concept of Tianxia, all under heaven, can't be clearer than the concept of all under heaven itself. So, when we need to explain things concretely, we revert to moral elements like xiao, filial piety, and ti, fraternal duty. To explain all under heaven, we talk about specific relationships like father and son, siblings and friends. Our moral standards vary based on relationships and their closeness. Thus, we first manage ourselves and our families before anything else. This is the differential mode of association. Even today, when discussing various issues in Chinese society, this concept is often cited. I hope that in the future, when you hear the term differential mode of association, it won't sound unfamiliar. It's like ripples in water, with each of us at the center of our own ripples. You and your siblings each create different ripples, but they might be close to each other. Now let's talk about Chinese families and gender roles. The size of a family isn't determined by the number of people, but by its complexity. A family with only 5 or 6 members can be considered large if those members represent different positions, such as a 4-generation household. Although the population isn't large, it's a big family due to its complexity. Conversely, A family with many children from the same parents might seem large, but it's a small family due to its simple structure. As these structures extend over generations, they form clans. Fei Xiaotong points out that the main axis in Chinese clans is vertical, not horizontal. This means Chinese people place more importance on relationships with parents and children than with spouses. In traditional Chinese extended families, daughters-in-law often had low status. They wouldn't dare offend their mother-in-law or father-in-law, working hard while swallowing their pride. The saying, "A daughter-in-law who suffers will one day become a mother-in-law," signifies gaining authority through vertical relationships, allowing one to eventually command their own children. Therefore, in Chinese families, vertical relationships are the most important. So what's the difference between vertical and horizontal relationships? In the US, for example, people often call their spouses honey and are very affectionate, always hugging and holding each other. This is because their relationships are horizontal. They consider the bond between spouses to be more important than the bond with parents. Once they grow up and leave home, they might rarely visit their parents, maybe just on holidays like Christmas or Thanksgiving. For many, their spouse is the most important person, so they show more open affection. This helps explain why Eastern people tend to be more reserved in their relationships, while Western people are more openly affectionate. Our family relationships are primarily vertical, not horizontal. In traditional rural societies, there's no need to create new social relationships. This means you should avoid causing trouble and follow established norms. Young men and women in China are not encouraged to develop passionate relationships because such emotions can cause a lot of trouble. They can disrupt the established social order and even lead to issues like elopement. This is why, historically, Chinese culture emphasizes that between men and women, there are only differences. In rural societies, separating men and women helps maintain social stability. This is a fundamental difference in gender perceptions between East and West. Rural society prefers everyone to behave properly and avoid excessive passion.